Your soulmate finally confessed their love for you in front of everyone. Here's what happened next. My beloved child, be still for a moment and let your heart rest. Lay aside every anxious thought that has been stealing your peace and every question that has kept you awake through the long hours of the night. There are seasons when it seems as though nothing is changing, when silence feels louder than hope, and when you begin wondering if the prayers whispered through your tears have simply disappeared into the darkness. But through this story, remember that the greatest transformations often begin quietly before anyone else notices them. A seed grows beneath the soil long before anyone sees the first green leaf. In the same way, hearts are often changing long before their actions reveal what has been happening within them. This is not a promise about your future or a hidden message about your own life. It is a fictional devotional story about courage, truth, forgiveness, and the quiet work that honesty can accomplish when fear no longer controls the heart. The one you have called your soulmate had spent many years hiding behind careful words and guarded emotions. They convinced themselves that remaining silent would protect everyone from disappointment. Whenever they wanted to express what they truly felt, another voice inside whispered that honesty would only create pain. They smiled when people expected them to smile. They laughed when everyone around them laughed. They built a life that looked peaceful from the outside, yet every evening, when the world became quiet, they found themselves carrying the same unanswered questions. Why had they allowed fear to speak louder than sincerity? Why had they believed that silence was safer than truth? Why had they spent so much energy protecting themselves from rejection that they never gave honesty a chance to be heard? My beloved child, fear often appears wise while quietly leading hearts away from the very conversations that could bring healing. It tells people to wait until the perfect moment, yet the perfect moment rarely arrives. It says to hide emotions until certainty appears, yet certainty often follows courage rather than preceding it. The person in this story slowly began recognizing that many of the walls surrounding their heart had not been built by other people. They had built those walls themselves, one fearful decision at a time. Every unspoken sentence became another brick. Every avoided conversation became another locked door. Looking back, they realized they had mistaken emotional distance for emotional safety. They discovered that protecting themselves from vulnerability had also protected them from genuine connection. As the months passed, something inside them quietly began changing. Instead of searching for someone to blame, they started examining their own heart. They opened an old journal filled with thoughts they had written years before. Between faded pages they found prayers, hopes, disappointments, and dreams that time had almost erased. One sentence immediately captured their attention: "I hope I never become so afraid of losing love that I never have the courage to speak it." Reading those words brought tears to their eyes. They could hardly remember writing them, yet those words described exactly where they now stood. Their younger self had recognized a truth their older self had nearly forgotten. Love hidden forever remains unknown. Kindness left unspoken cannot encourage another heart. Gratitude never expressed becomes another missed opportunity. That realization gently awakened something that had been sleeping for years. My beloved child, never underestimate the quiet power of reflection. Many people spend their lives rushing from one responsibility to another without ever slowing down long enough to ask whether they are becoming the person they truly hope to be. the one you have called your soulmate finally slowed down. They took long walks without distractions. They sat quietly during early mornings before the world awakened. They wrote honestly instead of pretending everything was fine. During those quiet moments they realized they had allowed the opinions of others to influence choices that should have belonged to their own conscience. Friends had encouraged caution. Family members had offered advice according to their own experiences. None of those people intended harm, yet little by little those outside voices became louder than the quiet conviction already living within their own heart. Instead of trusting honest conversations, they trusted assumptions. Instead of asking gentle questions, they imagined fearful answers. Looking back, they understood how easily misunderstanding grows wherever humility is absent. Meanwhile, your own journey had been shaping you in ways no one else could fully see. Difficult seasons had taught patience. Unanswered questions had strengthened resilience. Disappointment had deepened compassion rather than bitterness. You had learned that peace does not depend upon controlling every outcome. Peace grows when the heart chooses gratitude even while waiting for clarity. Though this fictional story follows another person's perspective for a time, your character had also been quietly refined. Every challenge became an opportunity to become kinder. Every setback became an invitation to grow wiser. Without realizing it, you were becoming someone capable of listening with grace, forgiving with sincerity, and loving without allowing fear to rule your decisions. Then came an invitation neither of you expected. Mutual friends organized a gathering celebrating an important milestone. It was the kind of event where laughter filled the room, conversations flowed naturally, and familiar faces from different seasons of life unexpectedly crossed paths again. At first, the person you have called your soulmate almost declined the invitation. Old fears whispered that seeing familiar people would only reopen memories best left untouched. Yet something inside urged them not to run this time. Instead of avoiding another opportunity, they quietly decided to attend. They told themselves they expected nothing extraordinary. They simply wanted to stop allowing fear to decide where they would or would not go. As the evening unfolded, they noticed how much everyone had changed. Time had matured every face, softened old disagreements, and replaced youthful certainty with greater humility. They listened as friends shared stories about careers, families, disappointments, and unexpected blessings. With every conversation they became more aware of one simple truth. Life was far too short to continue living behind carefully guarded walls. While others spoke openly about lessons they had learned, they silently realized they no longer wanted to carry words that had never been spoken. My beloved child, courage rarely arrives as a loud emotion. More often it appears as a quiet decision repeated one faithful step at a time. During that evening they found themselves remembering every moment they had almost spoken honestly but chose silence instead. Every missed opportunity returned, not to condemn them, but to remind them that another opportunity still existed. They understood they could not rewrite yesterday, but they could choose who they would become today. That choice mattered more than every regret combined. As the celebration continued, someone unexpectedly invited guests to share words of gratitude for people who had positively influenced their lives. One by one, friends stood and thanked parents, mentors, spouses, and lifelong companions. Listening to those heartfelt reflections stirred something deep within them. Their heart began racing. Their hands trembled slightly. Every excuse that had once seemed convincing suddenly felt small compared to the weight of years spent hiding the truth. They quietly prayed for wisdom, not for a perfect outcome, but for the courage to speak honestly. When the room finally grew quiet, they slowly stood. Every conversation stopped. Every eye turned toward them. They took a deep breath and admitted that for years they had allowed fear, pride, and misunderstanding to keep them silent. They spoke about gratitude, growth, forgiveness, and the lessons learned through difficult seasons. They acknowledged mistakes without making excuses. Then, with a voice trembling but sincere, they confessed that one person had shaped their life more deeply than they had ever found the courage to admit. They did not make grand promises or demand anything in return. They simply thanked that person for the kindness, patience, and encouragement that had quietly transformed their heart over the years. The room became completely silent. Some people smiled gently. Others wiped tears from their eyes. No one had expected such honesty. For the first time in many years, they felt completely free, not because they knew what would happen next, but because fear no longer controlled their voice. They had finally chosen truth over comfort and authenticity over appearances. As they finished speaking and slowly sat back down, they dared to look across the room. The person whose life they had just spoken about was looking back with tears in their eyes, holding something unexpected in their hands. A folded letter that had remained unread for years. Neither of them yet knew what those forgotten words contained, but both sensed that the letter would reveal a truth capable of changing everything they believed about the journey that had brought them to this very moment, and that truth would become the beginning of the next chapter. My beloved child, remain here with me a little longer, and do not let your heart rush ahead of wisdom. There are moments when truth enters a room so quietly that people almost miss the miracle hidden inside it. It does not arrive with thunder or demand attention. It simply stands in the light, waiting for humble hearts to recognize it. The room that had been filled with laughter only moments before now rested in complete silence. Every conversation had stopped. Every eye remained fixed on the person who had just spoken words they had carried in secret for far too many years. They had not stood to impress anyone. They had not spoken because they expected applause. They had finally chosen honesty over fear. Years of silence had ended in a few sincere sentences, and although their voice trembled, their heart had never felt steadier. They understood that courage is not measured by speaking loudly. Courage is measured by speaking truthfully when remaining silent would seem much easier. Through this fictional story, remember that the greatest victories often happen inside a heart long before anyone else notices them. The greatest confession was not simply that they cared deeply. The greatest confession was that they were no longer willing to let fear decide how they would live. As they slowly returned to their seat, they noticed something they had not expected. The room was not filled with judgment. It was filled with compassion. Some people lowered their eyes, reflecting on conversations they themselves had postponed for too long. Others quietly reached for the hands of loved ones sitting beside them. A few smiled through tears because they remembered their own journey toward forgiveness and honesty. In that unexpected silence, many hearts were being changed at the same time. One person's courage had quietly given others permission to stop hiding behind carefully constructed walls. The person you have called your soulmate realized that truth has a remarkable way of encouraging people beyond the one who first speaks it. Honest words often become invitations for others to examine their own hearts with greater humility. My beloved child, there are times when people spend years believing they must appear strong by hiding every emotion. Yet genuine strength is revealed when humility becomes greater than pride. The person in this story had spent far too long protecting an image of confidence while secretly carrying uncertainty. They believed that admitting their feelings would somehow make them appear weak. Instead, the opposite happened. The moment they spoke honestly, they experienced a freedom they had never known before. They realized that pretending requires constant effort, but sincerity allows the soul to rest. Nothing about their circumstances had suddenly become perfect, yet peace quietly settled within them because they were no longer divided between what they truly felt and what they allowed the world to see. Across the room, your heart was filled with emotions that were difficult to describe. Surprise came first. Then gratitude. Then a quiet sadness for all the years that had been shaped by misunderstanding. As you listened, memories returned one after another. You remembered conversations that once seemed unfinished. You remembered encouraging words exchanged during difficult seasons. You remembered moments when both of you had chosen silence because neither wanted to risk being misunderstood. Looking back, you realized that fear had never completely erased kindness. It had only hidden it beneath layers of hesitation. Those memories no longer felt heavy. Instead, they reminded you that sincere relationships often leave lasting lessons, even when life becomes complicated. My beloved child, never allow disappointment to convince you that kindness was wasted. Every encouraging word spoken with sincerity continues working long after it has been forgotten by the one who first spoke it. Every act of compassion leaves a mark upon another heart, even if you never witness the fruit it eventually produces. The person you have called your soulmate finally understood this truth. As they reflected on the past, they realized that your patience, generosity, and quiet encouragement had remained with them through seasons neither of you expected. During moments of uncertainty, they often remembered your gentle reminders to remain hopeful. During times of failure, they recalled the confidence you once expressed in their potential. They had not fully appreciated those gifts when they first received them. Only years later did they recognize how deeply they had shaped the person they were becoming. The gathering slowly continued, though something inside the atmosphere had changed. Conversations became gentler. Laughter returned, yet it carried a new warmth. People seemed less interested in appearances and more interested in meaningful connection. It was as though one moment of vulnerability had reminded everyone present that life is too precious to spend hiding behind masks. The person in this story quietly thanked God within this fictional narrative for giving them the courage to stop pretending. They understood that regardless of what tomorrow might bring, they had finally become the kind of person they once hoped to be, someone who valued truth more than comfort and integrity more than approval. Then your eyes met again from opposite sides of the room. No dramatic words were exchanged. No one rushed across the floor. Instead, there was a simple smile filled with gratitude and understanding. Sometimes the most meaningful conversations begin without a single sentence. Both of you recognized that the years had changed you. The disappointments had softened your hearts instead of hardening them. The unanswered questions had produced wisdom instead of bitterness. Neither of you was the same person who had once allowed fear to decide so much. That quiet realization became more powerful than any speech either of you could have prepared. My beloved child, there are seasons when people ask why certain journeys take so long. They imagine that delays always mean failure. Yet often those seasons are preparing character rather than postponing blessing. Had these two hearts met again before learning humility, they might have repeated the same mistakes. Had they spoken before understanding compassion, they might have reopened old wounds instead of healing them. Growth had been taking place where neither could see it. Patience had replaced impulsiveness. Grace had replaced resentment. Wisdom had replaced assumption. Those invisible victories mattered far more than either of them realized. As the evening drew closer to its end, many guests began saying their goodbyes. The room slowly emptied until only a few familiar faces remained. It was then that someone quietly approached your table carrying the folded letter that had been noticed earlier. They explained that it had been discovered inside an old collection of photographs after years of being forgotten. No one had realized how important it might become. The envelope had never been opened. Time had slightly faded the paper, but the handwriting remained clear. Everyone else stepped away respectfully, leaving the decision entirely in your hands. For several moments neither of you reached for the letter. It rested quietly between you like a reminder that some truths require patience before they are understood. Finally, with gentle hands, the envelope was opened. Inside was a handwritten message from years earlier. It spoke of gratitude, uncertainty, hope, and fear. It revealed that long ago both hearts had been wrestling with the very same questions while believing they were facing those struggles alone. The letter contained no accusations. It did not blame anyone for the distance that had grown. Instead, it revealed how deeply each person had cared while quietly believing the other had already moved on. Reading those forgotten words brought tears to both of your eyes. Years of misunderstanding suddenly appeared in a different light. The greatest obstacle had never been a lack of love. It had been the absence of honest conversation. My beloved child, let this story remind you that truth does not always remove sorrow, but it often removes confusion. Forgiveness does not erase history, yet it allows wisdom to grow where regret once lived. Honest hearts are not promised perfect endings, but they are given the peace that comes from living sincerely. As this chapter closes, both of you leave that gathering changed, not because every question has already been answered, but because fear no longer has the final word. Side by side, carrying the old letter between you, you step outside into the cool evening air, unaware that one final conversation waiting beneath the quiet night sky will reveal a forgotten promise from years ago, a promise that neither of you remembered making, yet one that will forever change how you understand your journey together in the final chapter. My beloved child, remain patient a little longer, for some of life's greatest moments are not found in loud celebrations but in quiet conversations that change two hearts forever. The evening had grown peaceful. Most of the guests had already gone home, leaving only the gentle sound of music drifting through the nearly empty hall. The folded letter rested carefully between the two of you, its faded pages now carrying a meaning far greater than either of you had imagined. For years it had remained hidden, untouched by time except for the yellowing edges of the paper. Yet the words inside had awakened memories that neither of you expected to revisit. It was no longer about wondering who had been right or wrong. It was about realizing how easily two sincere people can lose their way when fear speaks louder than honesty. Through this fictional story, remember that the strongest relationships are not built because people never make mistakes. They are built because people eventually become courageous enough to face those mistakes with humility, compassion, and truth. For several long moments, neither of you spoke. There was no pressure to fill the silence because it no longer felt uncomfortable. Instead, it became a place where both hearts could breathe after carrying years of unanswered questions. You looked at one another with new understanding, recognizing how much life had changed both of you. Time had softened old disappointments. Difficult seasons had replaced certainty with wisdom. The dreams you once carried had matured, not because they all came true, but because they taught you what truly mattered. Looking into each other's eyes, you both realized that the people standing there were no longer the same individuals who had once allowed misunderstandings to create so much distance. Growth had quietly done its work. My beloved child, many people believe that love alone is enough to sustain every relationship. Yet love without honesty becomes fragile. Love without humility struggles to survive difficult conversations. Love without forgiveness slowly becomes exhausted beneath the weight of unspoken expectations. The person you have called your soulmate had finally learned these lessons. During the years apart, they had chased success, stayed busy, and tried convincing themselves that moving forward meant forgetting the past. Yet every accomplishment felt incomplete because integrity demanded something they had postponed for far too long. They needed to become the kind of person who spoke truth even when vulnerability felt uncomfortable. They needed to stop allowing fear to decide which conversations deserved to happen. That transformation had become the greatest gift of the journey. The letter remained open in your hands as both of you slowly reread several lines together. One paragraph especially caught your attention. It described a day years earlier when your soulmate had planned to tell you how deeply they appreciated your presence in their life. They had rehearsed those words countless times. They had imagined how the conversation might unfold. But just before they gathered the courage to speak, someone casually mentioned that you seemed interested in another path. Believing that assumption without ever asking you directly, they quietly buried everything they had hoped to say. Reading those sentences brought a mixture of sadness and relief. Sadness because one misunderstanding had influenced so many years. Relief because the silence had never been caused by indifference. It had been caused by uncertainty. You gently smiled and admitted something you had never shared with anyone before. During that same season, you had also prepared a letter. You had written pages expressing gratitude for the encouragement, friendship, and kindness that had carried you through one of the hardest periods of your life. Yet every time you considered delivering it, you convinced yourself that the timing was wrong. You worried that your words might complicate their life instead of bringing clarity. So you folded the pages, placed them inside a drawer, and promised yourself you would find a better moment someday. That better moment never seemed to arrive. Hearing your confession, your soulmate quietly laughed through tears. Both of you realized how similar your fears had always been. Each heart had been waiting for certainty while the other was waiting for courage. My beloved child, this story reminds us that assumptions often grow where honest conversations are absent. When people stop asking gentle questions, imagination begins writing stories that were never true. Fear fills empty spaces with its own explanations. Pride discourages vulnerability. Time quietly increases the distance until both people believe reconciliation has become impossible. Yet truth possesses a remarkable ability to restore perspective. It does not erase lost years, but it allows those years to become teachers instead of lifelong regrets. The person in this story no longer wished to rewrite history. Instead, they desired to honor it by refusing to repeat its mistakes. The conversation continued as both of you shared memories that had never been spoken aloud. Some stories brought laughter. Others brought tears. There were moments when neither of you could believe how many misunderstandings had survived simply because no one had asked one sincere question. You talked about dreams that had changed, challenges that had strengthened you, and the quiet ways ordinary acts of kindness had remained unforgettable. Your soulmate admitted that during difficult seasons they often remembered your encouragement. Whenever they doubted themselves, your words returned unexpectedly, reminding them to keep moving forward. You confessed that their belief in your potential had given you confidence during moments when you almost gave up. Neither of you realized how deeply your lives had continued influencing one another even while walking separate paths. As the evening became late, you stepped outside together beneath a sky filled with stars. A gentle breeze carried away the warmth of the day, and for the first time in years, there was no awkwardness between you. The silence now felt peaceful because it no longer carried hidden questions. Instead, it carried understanding. You walked slowly through the quiet streets, speaking not about what either of you had lost, but about what you had learned. The conversation shifted away from regret and toward gratitude. Every difficult season had shaped qualities neither of you wanted to lose. Patience had grown where frustration once lived. Compassion had replaced judgment. Wisdom had replaced certainty. Looking back, neither of you wished the painful chapters had happened, yet both recognized that those experiences had refined your character in meaningful ways. My beloved child, character is often life's greatest treasure. Success may impress people for a season, but integrity earns trust that lasts far longer. Honest relationships are strengthened not because disagreements never happen but because both hearts remain committed to listening, learning, and extending grace. The person you have called your soulmate finally understood that genuine courage is not found in dramatic declarations alone. It is revealed through consistent kindness, truthful conversations, and the willingness to grow each day. They no longer wanted love to be built upon excitement alone. They wanted it to rest upon friendship, respect, honesty, and shared values that could endure every changing season. As the night came to an end, your soulmate stopped walking and looked at you with a calmness you had never seen before. There was no fear in their eyes now, only sincerity. They thanked you for the patience you had shown throughout the years, even when life had been confusing. They thanked you for every encouraging word that had quietly remained with them. Most importantly, they thanked you for giving them an example of grace they had only fully understood with time. You smiled warmly, recognizing that the greatest change was not in the circumstances surrounding either of you but in the people you had both become. Whatever tomorrow might hold, this conversation had already brought a peace that years of silence never could. As you prepared to say goodnight, your soulmate reached into their jacket pocket and carefully unfolded another small piece of paper they had carried with them for many years. It was not the old letter from the gathering. It was a list of hopes they had written long ago about the kind of person they wanted to become. Looking down at those faded words, they quietly smiled and realized that, without noticing it, the journey had already transformed them into that person. Then they looked back at you and gently asked a simple question that would begin the next chapter of this story: would you be willing to start again? Not by pretending the past never happened, but by building something new with the wisdom we have both gained along the way. My beloved child, stay here for a little while longer and let your heart become quiet. Some endings are not truly endings at all. They are invitations to begin again with greater wisdom than before. Many people spend years asking for another chance while forgetting that another chance only becomes meaningful when both hearts have learned from the first journey. Through this fictional story, remember that love is not proven by dramatic moments alone. It is revealed through everyday faithfulness, honest conversations, patient listening, and the willingness to choose kindness even when life becomes difficult. The confession that happened before everyone was never meant to be the conclusion of this story. It was simply the moment when truth finally stepped into the light. What happened afterward became far more important than the applause, the surprise, or the emotions of that evening. The days that followed would reveal whether two people had truly changed or whether they would quietly repeat the same mistakes that once separated them. The morning after the gathering arrived with unusual peace. Neither of you rushed to send long messages or make promises that emotions alone could not sustain. Instead, there was a quiet understanding that genuine trust grows slowly. Your soulmate woke earlier than usual and sat beside the window watching the sunrise paint the sky with soft shades of gold. They remembered every word spoken the previous evening, not with embarrassment but with gratitude. For years they had imagined that confessing their feelings would either solve everything immediately or destroy every remaining possibility. Instead, they discovered something far healthier. Honest words had opened the door to understanding, not instant perfection. That realization brought relief. They no longer carried the exhausting burden of pretending. Whatever happened next would be built upon truth rather than fear. My beloved child, people often mistake excitement for love and certainty for faith. Excitement rises quickly and fades just as quickly. Genuine love grows steadily through patience, sacrifice, and mutual respect. Faith is not demanding to know every answer before taking the next step. Faith is choosing integrity even when tomorrow remains uncertain. The one you have called your soulmate had finally learned this lesson. They no longer wished to impress you with grand speeches or dramatic gestures. Instead, they desired to become someone whose daily actions reflected honesty, compassion, and consistency. They understood that trust is earned through countless ordinary moments, not one unforgettable evening. Over the next several weeks, both of you agreed to spend time together without placing unnecessary pressure upon the future. You met for coffee on quiet Saturday mornings. You walked through familiar parks where old memories gently blended with new conversations. You discovered that both of you had changed in beautiful ways. The conversations were no longer centered on what had gone wrong years before. Instead, They focused on who each of you had become because of those experiences. You spoke openly about disappointments that had strengthened your character. You shared dreams that had evolved with time. You laughed about misunderstandings that once felt overwhelming but now revealed how much maturity both of you had gained. Every conversation brought another reminder that healing rarely arrives through one dramatic moment. It grows through repeated choices to remain honest and kind. One afternoon you visited a small bookstore that had once been one of your favorite places. While browsing the shelves, your soulmate smiled as they noticed a journal nearly identical to the one that had helped them begin their season of reflection months earlier. They quietly picked it up and handed it to you. "This one isn't for writing about regrets," they said gently. "It's for writing about the life we hope to build from here." Those simple words carried more meaning than any elaborate declaration ever could. They reflected someone who no longer wished to live in yesterday but had learned to appreciate the future without forgetting the lessons of the past. My beloved child, never underestimate the power of small moments shared with sincerity. A peaceful conversation over coffee. A walk beneath quiet trees. A handwritten note of encouragement. A sincere apology. A patient answer to a difficult question. These ordinary acts become the foundation upon which extraordinary relationships are built. Many people wait for spectacular experiences while overlooking the quiet opportunities to strengthen trust every single day. The two hearts in this story gradually realized that their greatest blessing was not merely finding one another again. Their greatest blessing was becoming people capable of loving with greater wisdom than before. Months passed, and your friends began noticing the difference. They commented on the peace they saw in both of you. There was no need to prove anything or convince anyone. Instead of rushing ahead because of emotion, both of you intentionally built a friendship rooted in respect, laughter, honesty, and shared values. Whenever difficult conversations arose, neither person retreated into silence. Instead, you both remembered the painful cost of assumptions and chose to ask gentle questions instead. What once would have become misunderstanding now became opportunities to understand one another more deeply. Every challenge strengthened trust because it was met with humility rather than pride. One evening, while walking beside a quiet lake as the sun slowly disappeared beyond the horizon, your soulmate paused and looked at the peaceful reflection upon the water. "Do you know what surprises me the most?" they asked softly. "I thought confessing my feelings would be the bravest thing I would ever do. But I was wrong. The bravest part has been learning how to love honestly every day after that confession." You smiled because you understood exactly what they meant. Speaking the truth required courage for one evening. Living that truth required courage every single day. Yet both of you now possessed the wisdom to choose that path together. My beloved child, remember this lesson wherever your own journey leads. Relationships are not strengthened because life becomes free from difficulty. They are strengthened because two people decide that kindness will be greater than pride, that listening will become more important than winning arguments, and that forgiveness will remain available whenever mistakes are made. No heart is perfect. Every person will occasionally speak carelessly or misunderstand another's intentions. But relationships built upon humility are able to recover because both people value understanding more than being proven right. As another season arrived, your soulmate invited you to return to the same place where the public confession had first taken place. The hall looked different now. The decorations had changed. Different people filled the room. Yet one thing remained the same, the quiet reminder that courage had transformed both of your lives there. Standing together, neither of you focused on the audience that had witnessed the confession months earlier. Instead, you reflected on everything that had happened afterward. The real miracle of the story had never been one emotional speech. The real miracle had been the daily commitment to honesty, patience, forgiveness, and steady growth. Before leaving, your soulmate reached into their pocket and unfolded the small list of hopes they had once carried. Beside every dream they had written years before, they had recently added one simple word: learning. They handed the paper to you with a smile and said, "I thought love meant finding the perfect person. Now I believe love is two imperfect people choosing to keep growing together with grace." Looking at those words, you realized that the journey had already given both of you something more valuable than certainty. It had given you wisdom. And as the two of you walked out beneath the evening sky, hand in hand, you understood that the next chapter of your lives would not be written by fear, assumptions, or silence. It would be written one honest conversation at a time, one act of kindness at a time, and one faithful step after another. Whatever joys or challenges the future might bring, both hearts now carried a quiet confidence that truth, humility, and compassion would always be stronger than fear. And that would remain the greatest love story either of you could ever choose to live.